This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jackie Leonard, and in the early hours of Thursday, the 3rd of January, these are our main stories. President Trump meets leaders of Congress to try to resolve the budget row, which has shut down parts of government. Brazilian investors welcome the new economy minister's ambitious privatization plan. And international election monitors give the Democratic Republic of Congo's presidential election a qualified thumbs up. Also in this podcast, we'll hear from the brother of a US citizen held on spying charges in Moscow, and we go out for dinner.
I've come to one of Kolkata's most popular new restaurants. It's full of customers tucking into their favourite dishes.
At one of India's very few beef cafes. And now we know the most distant space object ever explored by humans looks like a snowman. Before President Trump went into his meeting with congressional leaders in the White House on Wednesday, he spoke of getting a deal on the budget that would end the closure of 9 government departments. The stumbling block, his plan to build a wall on the US border with Mexico, for which he wants $5 billion. Mr. Trump said such a sum was low, considering the extent of the immigration problem at the Mexican border.
The $5.6 billion approved by the House is such a small amount compared to the level of the problem. When you see that the Democrats want to give away $12 billion extra, and we're giving away $54 billion in foreign aid. So we give money to countries, but we don't give money to our own country, which is another thing that I've been complaining about, and we're cutting that back. It's very unfair.
But the meeting failed to come up with a compromise. After the meeting, the Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer laid the blame for the partial government shutdown firmly at Mr. Trump's feet.
Our last meeting, the president said, I am going to shut the government down. They are now feeling the heat. It is not helping the president. It is not helping the Republicans to be the owners of this shutdown. Today, we gave them an opportunity to get out of that and open up the government as we debate border security. And to say to them, because he says he won't sign it and use the government as hostage, we should just give in. The American people don't want that. That's bad for our country, and that's not the way to govern.
So what did the meeting achieve? Anthony Zerka is our correspondent in Washington.
Well, not much that we see so far. They're still at an impasse. The Democrats coming out of that meeting say that they're going to pass some legislation tomorrow out of the House of Representatives, which they will control as of tomorrow, that would reopen the government, essentially funding the shutdown portions of the government, most of them through the end of the year, but Homeland Security, which manages the border and conceivably any kind of wall construction, that would be funded only through February. They say they're going to hand this over to the Senate, which Republicans still control, and they'll do with it as they please. If they hold it up, then the government stays shut down. If they pass it, it goes to Donald Trump. And he says he's not going to sign anything without his $5 billion of wall money. So we are still a long way from any sort of resolution here. And it seems like a compromise. We're going to have to work through this legislative process before either side gets to a point where they might be able to compromise somewhat on it.
And in the meantime, how is this shutdown affecting government workers and various departments?
Well, there are about 800,000 government workers who are currently either working without pay or furloughed, not working at all. And they are going to approach a time here in the coming days where they will miss a paycheck. And the government, the Office of Personnel Management, which handles the accounts, the accounting and payroll for government workers, they're already sending out notices giving tips to government workers on how to negotiate with their landlords or bill collectors in order to get some sort of extension. I mean, it's a remarkable thing to think that here are these people who are working for one of the most powerful governments in the world who are not going to get a paycheck on time. And national parks are shutting down. Museums here in D.C. are shutting down. The impact is being felt.
That was Anthony Zerka in Washington. For 3 days, people in the Democratic Republic of Congo have had no access to the internet and have been unable to send text messages because they've been blocked by the government. The official reason is that people have been spreading false results while votes are still being counted in Sunday's election, threatening public order. But critics say the shutdown is hampering the gathering of results across the vast country. Provisional results are due on Sunday. The election was largely peaceful, but there have been accusations of irregularities. And on Wednesday, we had an assessment from election observers. Here's the BBC's Louise de Wast in Kinshasa.
Regional observers today issued a statement saying that elections were comparatively well managed, that voting proceeded relatively smoothly, but they did say that there were a number of logistical issues on voting day. For example, less than 60% of polling stations opened on time. It's still too early to say if that will have if that had an impact on voter turnout. Another issue that they raised was that voters were not sufficiently educated on how to use electronic voting machines that were used in the country for the first time. The African Union concluded its statement saying they hope the results will reflect the will of the Congolese people. This statement was based on preliminary observations. We are expecting them to publish another statement once results are finally published. This is really a crucial step, the compilation of results. It's a crucial step in any election. In the past election in 2011, it had proved problematic, and so there's a lot of scrutiny at the moment on how that is going. But for now, yes, we are expecting provisional results on January 6th and final results on January 15th.
Louise de Wast in Kinshasa. In Brazil, the cabinet of the new president, Jair Bolsonaro, has been detailing its policy aims. One key minister is Paulo Guedes, who has responsibility for the economy. He says the government will start an ambitious privatisation programme, which will include the mining and energy sectors. The main stock exchange index in Brazil has risen sharply. Our America's editor, Leonardo Rocha, has this report.
President Jair Bolsonaro, who was sworn in on Tuesday, has given Paulo Guedes full autonomy to shape Brazil's new economic policy. In his first speech since taking office, Mr. Guedes didn't disappoint. He criticized previous left-wing governments for overspending and promised that the two pillars of the new administration would be privatization and tax cuts. Mr. Guedes said government spending would also be drastically reduced. The opposition says that Mr. Bolsonaro will favor the rich and big investors. They say he will neglect the social programs that have lifted millions of people out of poverty in Brazil, one of the world's most unequal societies.
Leonardo Rocha. For India's majority Hindu community, the cow is revered. There have been lynchings of those accused of transporting or eating beef. Several states have banned the slaughter of cows and the sale of meat. But in West Bengal, it's still allowed, and a beef cafe has opened up in its capital, Kolkata. Rahul Tandon reports.
Welcome to Sim Sim, Kolkata's beef cafe.
I've come to one of Kolkata's most popular new restaurants. It's full of customers tucking into their favourite dishes. You won't find many places like this in India. This is one of the country's only beef cafes because the meat has become one of India's hottest political issues. Doma Wang from the northeast of India set up Shim Shim.
People have written that we'll burn down the place and stuff. There is a big issue of beef in our country. There have been cases where people have been murdered and a lot of things like that all over the country.
Because there are parts of India where beef is an important part of the diet, isn't it?
The northeast, the Darjeeling Hills, Sikkim, Goa. As far as I remember, I was given beef soup from the moment I was born. So, of course, I can't imagine life without beef. Beef has been very open, I've seen beef being sold in places like Mumbai, Kolkata. I've been buying it, cooking it all over wherever I visit the cities. And over these few years, all this beef ban and where, you even people are scared to post pictures of beef dishes.
I've left the restaurant and have come to a rally in Kolkata. Here a group of Hindus are marching, demanding that this state bans beef as well. Amongst them is the sadhu or holy man, Rishi Das.
गौ हत्या बंद होना चाहिए. ये हिंदुस्तान है.
The slaughter of cows must be stopped. This is a Hindu country. This is a crime. In fact, we should stop the slaughter of all animals and make people vegetarian.
बंद होना चाहिए. ऐसे पाप होता है ना.
Here on the busy streets of Kolkata, people have been closely following the recent state elections. The results were bad news for the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his BJP party. they lost 3 key states. So is it a sign that Indians are getting fed up of the beef debate? Let's go and find out.
In the modern scenario or in the urban scenario where people are well influenced with other religions, the beef issue isn't such a beef at all, honestly.
It matters because most of the population in India, they feel that cow is sacred to them. So some restrictions should be there. It's an important issue.
I have no issue with it personally, but yes, it should not hurt other religions and all equally.
Back in the kitchen of Shim Shim Cafe, the chefs are still cooking their beef, but with the issue like the pans here heating up, they're not sure how much longer they'll be able to do so.
That was Rahul Tandon reporting from India. Now, this. Moving, isn't it? It's a clip from the latest film by the rising Chinese director Bi Gan, A Long Day's Journey into Night. It won praise at the Cannes Film Festival last year and on Monday smashed box office expectations on its opening night in China. But it has since faced a backlash from angry viewers, claiming they were sold something very different. Sophie Eastor told us more.
As you might imagine from that tuneful singing, Jackie, A Long Day's Journey into Night is an art house film, and it's been described as a complex pseudo-noir drama. It's about a man who returns to his hometown to find his former lover, and it jumps from 2D to 3D, and the final hour consists of a dream sequence shot in a single take. And as such, it was only expected to do modestly well at the box office. However, it had a very clever marketing campaign that went viral in China. So this played off the movie's Chinese title, which is The Last Night on Earth. It launched on New Year's Eve with a billing as a perfect date movie. So cinemas timed their screenings to end a minute after midnight. And as the final scene in the film features the actors kissing, the advertising campaign encouraged couples to end the year with their own cross-year kiss in sync with the actors. And lots of couples bought into this. The film took almost $38 million on its opening night. That's the equivalent of films like Guardians of the Galaxy or Wonder Woman, Jackie. And it's a record for an art house film in China.
So what are people in China saying about this now?
Well, many Chinese viewers are really annoyed about this. They claim that they were sold a rom-com and instead they got something incomprehensible. Lots of users wrote on the Chinese movie website Maoyan and they said they fell asleep or they walked out. One viewer quoted in Variety magazine wrote, "The worst movie in history, Tricksters, Thieves," and it got a net rating of only 2.8. The following day, word of mouth had clearly spread because the film's takings plummeted to just over $1 million. Interestingly, a class element has come into this because reports say that lots of people who went to see the film came from medium-sized Chinese cities rather than the usual art house audience of cosmopolitan metropolises. And the director has responded to this. He said that, "I'm from a 4th or 5th tier city. Are you saying people there should only watch blockbuster films?" And unfortunately, the dominant view is we were misled. None of this cultural snobbery.
That was Sophie Eastor. Still to come in this podcast.
I like everybody. I may dislike some of the things they do or some of the things they say, but I never dislike the person himself.
The Briton who became one of Pakistan's most famous teachers has died aged 101. We'll look back at his life. It's the most distant space object ever explored by humans. Ultima Thule, an icy lump on the furthest boundary of our solar system, has been captured on camera by NASA's New Horizons spacecraft, and a new picture has been released. Alan Stern, who's part of the New Horizons team behind the project, said it was an unprecedented achievement.
It's only really the size of something like Washington, D.C., and it's about as reflective as garden variety dirt. And it's illuminated by a sun that's 1,900 times fainter than it is outside on a sunny day here on the Earth. So we were basically chasing it down in the dark at 32,000 miles an hour, and all that had to happen just right.
Our science correspondent Jonathan Amos told us more.
Remember, this was 6.5 billion kilometres from Earth, the most distant exploration of a planetary body ever. And what do we have? We have a snowman in space. This object looks just like a snowman. It's two objects kind of just jointly that have come very gently together. So slow, in fact, when they formed and they joined this double body. As one of the scientists said, you wouldn't have, if it was a car park bump, you'd been to the supermarket and you'd hit another car, there'd be no damage. You wouldn't need to fill out the insurance form. So that tells us something about the conditions out in the solar system way back at the start, 4.6 billion years ago. Out there, things were very gentle, very, very gentle indeed. But it's one image, and we need more, and they will come down over the next 20 months or so.
Yes, I mean, the higher resolution images are going to be arriving gradually, aren't they? So how much are we actually expecting to learn? What are we expecting?
Well, we wanted the basic shape, because you can do some geology with that. You can do some good sort of science speculation, let's call it that, of how this object formed. It's about 30 kilometres long. So one end is, the snowman's head is bigger than the snowman's body. To not have crumpled completely together, to just be touching, if you can imagine that, if you picked up the head of a snowman and put it on its body, it would be very defined. And this is very defined. So we went to this object, NASA went to this object to find out about the formation conditions at the start of the solar system, because it was so far out. It's kind of a deep freeze. It's the rubbish that's left over after building the solar system. And so this is where you find those initial ingredients. And it's proving fascinating.
That was Jonathan Amos. Paul Whelan, a former US Marine who now works in corporate security, was arrested in Moscow last Friday and accused of carrying out an act of espionage. If convicted, he faces a possible prison sentence of between 10 and 20 years. His family insists he's innocent. US consular officials have now been granted access to Mr. Whelan, and the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the United States wanted more information about his detention.
We've made clear to the Russians our expectation that we will learn more about the charges, come to understand what it is he's been accused of, and if the detention is not appropriate, we will demand his immediate return.
David Whelan is Paul's brother. Julian Marshall asked him if he knew what state of mind his brother was in after hearing that he'd been granted consular access.
Paul was fine, as fine as you can be in detention in Russia, and that people had seen him and that he looked healthy and was able to contribute or pass on a list of things that he needed in order to be made comfortable there. So that was really good. And we had an additional comment from United States Ambassador Huntsman, John Huntsman, which also just reinforced the commitment that the State Department has to keeping an eye on Paul while he's in Russia.
Tell me a little bit more about what your brother was doing in Russia at the time of his arrest.
Paul is a very generous person and a very loyal friend. And in that role, a friend of his, a former Marine as well, had asked him to come to Russia and help with a wedding ceremony that was going to be happening there. And not really the ceremony itself, but the wedding party that was going to be in Russia. Paul's been to Russia as well as many other countries a number of times. He travels for work and he travels extensively for pleasure. And so his experience of having already been to the Kremlin and having already walked around Red Square and navigated the metro, his friend felt that Paul could assist a bunch of Americans who hadn't otherwise ever been to Moscow. He'd arrived, I think, on December 22nd. And at least as late as the morning of the 28th, which is the day that he disappeared, he was at the Kremlin and Armory. It's a ticketed tour, and the wedding party was there, and he took a group of them through the Kremlin tour. Just, the words of the person who's already been there, as far as I understand. And there were a few more text messages after that, and then he wasn't available.
So he didn't turn up at the wedding?
Didn't turn up at the wedding, and he dotes on our family dog and takes care of my parents. I mean, sort of keeps an eye on them because he's the closest one of us. And so when he didn't follow up on, a veterinary appointment for the dog or share photos of the wedding, my parents started to get suspicious that something might have happened to him.
I mean, he has a military background. He now works in corporate security. Do you think those two roles, those two jobs may have been misconstrued by the Russians?
I don't think so. I would be surprised that that military service for any visitor to Russia would necessarily be a huge red flag. I mean, perhaps it is these days. And his corporate security work would have taken him there before, so that sort of role I think they would have been familiar with as well.
So in your mind, and indeed the mind of the rest of his family, he is innocent?
Yes.
Why do you think the Russians therefore have arrested him, have charged him with spying, with espionage?
That's a question I don't have an answer for. I think we live in a complicated and perhaps more rapidly complicating world. And we've tended to focus our resources on getting Paul home and not worrying so much about the rationale for why the Russians have done it.
Because you're doubtless aware of the speculation that his arrest might be likely payback for the US prosecution of the confessed Russian agent Maria Butina.
I've heard that, yes.
That was David Whelan, the brother of Paul Whelan, the man detained in Russia accused of spying, and he was speaking to Julian Marshall. When the British Army Major, Geoffrey Langlands, travelled to Pakistan to train its fledgling army after the Second World War, he decided he didn't have enough money to return to his native England, so he never left, swapping the drill square for the classroom to become one of the country's most respected teachers. The announcement of his death at the age of 101 has prompted tributes from high-profile former pupils, including Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan. Jill McGivering looks back at the life of the man described as the quintessential Englishman.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
For 7 decades, Geoffrey Langlands, often known simply as the Major, taught generations of Pakistanis. He was orphaned as a young boy and supported himself from the age of 18 by teaching. When the Second World War broke out, he went to South Asia with the British Army and stayed on. He loved adventure, and his stints as a teacher range from a military academy to the country's most prestigious private school, Aitchison College, where he taught many future political leaders, including Imran Khan. Interviewed by the BBC in 2005, he said he loved Pakistan, but never lost his own identity.
I am British, very British, the old-fashioned British of the 1930s. You see me always in suit, and in other little ways, question of time. Everyone knows that if I say I'll be there at 4 o'clock, they know I'll be there at 5 minutes to 4.
Geoffrey Langlands spent 10 years in the lawless tribal areas where he was kidnapped at gunpoint, and later took on a school in another poor, far-flung region, Chitral, where he quietly championed modern secular education for girls as well as boys, and banned corporal punishment. He carried on teaching until his mid-90s.
Jill McGivering on the life of Geoffrey Langlands, who's died aged 101. And before we go, here is a tweet posted by the airline Cathay Pacific. Happy 2019 all, and to those who bought our good, very good surprise special on New Year's Day. Yes, we made a mistake, but we look forward to welcoming you on board with your ticket issued. Hope this will make your 2019 special too. Hashtag promise made, promise kept. Hashtag lesson learnt. What Cathay Pacific is referring to there is that it will honour first and business class tickets that it sold for a fraction of the usual price. Seats on August 2019 flights from Vietnam to New York, which normally cost nearly $16,000, were offered for $675. The bargain fares were withdrawn, but not before they'd been spotted by eagle-eyed travel bloggers on New Year's Eve. McNeil Janert from Milwaukee in the United States managed to book a first-class ticket from Boston to Hong Kong and an onward flight to Hanoi in business class for under $1,300.
I think a one-way ticket on Cathay First is like $18,000 US, and that's quite a bit out of my price range. So having first-class ticket has always been a dream of mine, internationally, Cathay in particular. And so I was willing to roll the dice to see if this worked. So we just kind of held on for dear life until we got the announcement from Cathay that said, yeah, we'll honor the fares.
McNeil Janert. And that's it from us for now, but there will be a surprisingly good value first-class global news podcast later. If you want to comment on this one or the topics covered in it, do please send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jackie Leonard, and until next time, goodbye.